Hi, I'm Renegade from Renegade Games, and today I'm here to talk to you about my highs and lows of playing Architects of the West Kingdom. Since this is my first video like this, I want to outline some of the goals and sort of the format of these videos as well. First off, this video is not meant to be a review. No score will be given for the game, but perhaps my hope is that by pointing out a game's strengths and weaknesses, you can potentially figure out if that game is right for you or not. My goal for these videos is to put on my designer, developer, and publisher hat and point out my 3 favorite things that the game does and my 3 least favorite things that the game does. But I want to keep the videos relatively short, and as a designer and developer, I'll often spend time potentially brainstorming mechanisms and solutions about how I think those low points could be fixed, and why I think the mechanisms and solutions that the game found that I like so much lend themselves toward what make the game so strong, and praising those highs and why I like them so much. That's pretty much it. So without further ado, here are my 3 highs for Architects of the West Kingdom. So first of all, my number one, my favorite thing about Architects of the West Kingdom, if you're unfamiliar with it, is this, what I call a worker placement engine. It's one of the only worker placements that I can think of where you keep your workers out and you're not blocking spaces from other players. You're simply, when you your first worker somewhere, you get 1 resource. When you place your second worker there and you have 1, you get 2 resources, 3, 4, etc. And you have this cascading effect where everything is just getting better as you place out this huge pile of workers that you start with. And that just feels really powerful and really cool. And it's a really unique mechanism that I haven't seen in other worker placements. And I think it helps distinguish itself from your other more traditional worker placement games as well. This leads into my number 2 high of the game, which is that this push your luck tension and the interaction between players, I think, is a lot more interesting than most worker placements when you're just taking away a spot. One of my big critiques, personally, about a lot of Euro games is that it's a solo game that I'm potentially playing with other people at a table, and there's not a lot of interactions I can do, and players who are good at the game or bad at the game just tend to play the game the same way every time they play. And this game has an interesting methodology for interrupting that and that player interaction, because every time I see you place your worker down and get 4, wood or 4 brick or 5 brick by placing that 5th worker, the incentive for me to stop your engine is more than just simply wanting to deny you. I think when you just have like a feel bad, where I'm just simply doing something bad, taking a turn to set you back, and I'm not gaining any benefit from it, has problems with, king making, and you've got to stop the person who's winning, but then ultimately the guy who also you're playing with who didn't stop them could potentially win because they're not wasting action stopping the guy. I don't think that denial works well, but the capturing mechanic of capturing the workers from someone else and then selling them and delivering them to the prison for a lot of money is a great tension and a really cool interaction between players. And I think the advantage of that, I think why it works too, is in Euro games where take-that mechanisms don't work particularly well, the only way to get your workers back is for someone to capture them. So you almost expect and know, and everyone knows their workers are going to get captured and go to prison, and that once you accept that's part of the game, I don't think that there's any hard feelings with that mechanism. And I like that ability of, I've got 4 workers there. If I can place this 5th one, I can get a bunch of this resource I need and build the cathedral, or something like that. And it really sets up these interesting, these interesting highs where you just get to that 5th worker before someone finally rounds you up and turns you into the authorities, which I really like. And then last but not least, I have sort of a couple highs, which are sort of minor things, which all sort of lend themselves together really well. I like that there's no rounds in this game and that you just get into a flow and you keep going. And I think a result of that ease of play and the lack of rounds helps keep you in the game better and also makes this game a really good weight. It's not quite gateway. Like, I wouldn't advise anyone who's playing this game for the first time to jump in to worker placement if they're not familiar with it as their first thing. But if you've played a few games before, this game is really easy to teach to new players who are familiar with games, and there's a lot of depth sort of below it. So I think, and has a good flow to it. So I think for those reasons, I actually tend to get this game to the table a lot more than some other worker placement games that I like even more. I mean, I think Paladins is a little bit, it's certainly more complex, but the setup time and everything for that and the teaching, the brunt of teaching for that game makes it where I just don't play it as much as I would play Architects. So I think that's another strength and high for this particular game compared to others. So moving on to my lows and the things I would have spent time in development sort of focusing on, trying to fix. I don't think this game has any major mechanical flaws. I think a lot of this game has what I would call thematic missteps or things that just don't like feel right when you're playing it, and they stick out as a result. So my number one for this is absolutely this rule. They even pointed out in the rule book that you can capture your own guys. I mean, that mechanism, I mean, I know you have to get your workers back, and you know, if you run out of workers, there's this huge penalty where on your turn you just get one worker back to take a worker placement action next turn. So it's basically like a turn skip, which is horrible. And the fact that you may get that worker back, you may reach that point because you don't realize that this is one of the mechanisms of the game. I think it's counterintuitive to think that you need to stop your own engine and capture your own characters. And the fact that you can get to the point where you've missed that thematically, take a turn that's a waste of just getting one worker back from the board, and then spending that next turn to capture your workers at a location because you need your workers back, there's a flaw there and there's something missing. You know, for me, capturing your own workers is this weird rule exception, which I don't like either, which is you don't capture them on your board and then send them to prison for money. You just get them directly to your board, so you sort of skip a couple actions, which I guess is good, but you're not getting the money income, which isn't great. And it's just this big rule exception thing that I think works against the mechanisms and the theme of the game. It immediately takes me out of the theme and makes me know it's a game. So I would have liked that to be addressed in some way. You know, I know that in a two-player game, there's less chances and there's less capturing going on. So when I've played two-player, I've seen it happen more that you have to capture your own people. But my thing is maybe you don't have to capture your own people. Maybe instead of having that crappy turn where you get one worker back and you call them back and get one worker from one spot on the board, maybe you can pick a spot and just get all the workers back. It's effectively a capture. You're not losing a turn as much, and it doesn't break the theme, and it's not this huge rule exception. So, you know, that's definitely one of the things that, you know, depending on the player count, it happens more or less, but I don't even think it should exist. I don't think it should be an option that you capture your own people. The next thing for me, which I was actually thinking about while I was trying to put together this list, is that the resources in this game are way too samey. I mean, I can boil it down in my head to two different resources effectively. You have money, which is great and like helps you hire apprentices and build your engine with those cards, and you spend money on a lot of placements. You know, in the black market, you can get rid of debts at the guardhouse with money. Money is used where you would use money, and it makes sense. And then you have all these other resources which feel the same: rock, wood, like marble, all these building resources which feel completely the same because all they do is build things for the cathedral or build things for the card. For your cards, for your buildings that you're building. And I get that it's called Architects of the Kingdom, but I feel like I should know what wood is good for, what bricks are good for, what stone is good for, other than that's the cards I have in my hand and those are the things I need to build. Why are there so many of those building resources? Just to make the cards and the paths feel different, to have enough worker placement spots on the board? I would have really looked at trimming that down or giving clearer cards or paths to each of those resources and what they can build and what they're good for. And maybe part of the reason is that you just don't have enough building cards. You sort of start with a certain amount, and getting them is sort of expensive to draw more building cards. Maybe there should be a market out where I can build any of the global blueprints there, and have very clear sort of quick buildings I could build with wood or brick, and then having the more advanced buildings be marble and stone, which are worth more victory points at the end. Maybe those are worth victory points at the end, and I can build sort of shabby houses in the quickly to build my engine another way. I just wish that I could remember what differentiates all those building resources a little bit more. And I think it can feel a little samey when it's been a while since you've played the game, or if you played a lot of games in between it, and you're not looking at the cards. All those building resources you collect with all those worker placements feel they aren't very distinguishable, at least from my memory currently. And then last but not least, I have a low, which can be a low. I actually think it's a cool mechanic. Mechanically, I think it's really cool. It's the virtue track and the debts that are in this game. And as you move up the virtue track, it's worth a lot of victory points. But then if you are sort of a scoundrel, if you will, you move down this virtue track, which allows you to skip out on taxes, rob the king's taxes of money without very many repercussions because you're just going down in virtue, which you're already very low in. It lets you deal in the black market, but it's worth negative points at the end. And it can lead to having debts and things like that. And I think it's a really cool mechanic. I think, for me, at least from my playthroughs, the half a dozen times I've played the game, the thing I don't like about the virtue track, especially if you're playing with new people without the variable players and the starting point, I actually think that helps address it some. But if you're playing with new people on the generic side, like teaching someone for the first time, people, in my experience, are very averse to taking that particular path to victory. They see negative points. They don't want to be perceived as like a bad person. And I don't think there's a lot of people, at least gamers in my group, who will actively try to take that path without being pushed in that direction. And I think that's sad. And I think that there's a disconnect with that, because you can have games where everyone is sort of moving up the virtue track or delving a little low, but then popping back up to the middle. No one's really taking on a lot of debts. No one's playing with this system that underlies underneath. So I wish there was a way that the game, made that more, put that more in front of you. Whether it was through, they do it a little bit with the variable starter powers. You can pick a scoundrel, but it still doesn't address this problem of if I don't want to play that with that game and I don't want to be that scoundrel person, I just don't pick that character and then I avoid it, and then this whole layer of the game isn't experienced. And I see it in the black market too, where the black market reset just doesn't happen because a person doesn't want to take that final action. And it goes to the other. There's another mechanism in timer in the game that forces the black market reset. But a lot of times I've played the game, I've felt like that black market stuff should be either more appealing. The rewards, the 3 actions in the black market should be more appealing, where people are just like, I have to take that. Like, that's so good right for me right now that I really need to take it. Or the penalties need to be a little bit less. Or it needs to be, maybe everything just needs to be amped up a little bit. Maybe, I know the game's pretty balanced, the scores are balanced in the game, but maybe that whole element just needs to be amped up a little bit. And virtue, when it's good, needs to be a little bit higher in point value, and things in the middle need to be worth lower points, and things at the bottom need to be worth, have more advantages, and you're paying less taxes. Like when you're designing a game and something like isn't working or the numbers aren't quite right, one of the rules of thumb that we use is you double it or have it. And I think the virtue debt thing could have used some like doubling and halving just to incentivize people to use it more, and play with those mechanics. For me, whether it's a fault of the game or it's a fault of just my gaming group, I can't tell you, but the fact that the incentives for being a scoundrel just don't seem quite high enough, at least especially for new players to delve into, or whether it's a player, that can happen too, where it just doesn't feel right. Maybe mathematically this is perfectly balanced. And when you have players who have played it 10 times, they know how good playing as a scoundrel can be if things fall into their lap correctly. But if it takes that long to figure it out, something's wrong. And you need to work with people and meet them in a way to overcome their aversion to sort of doing that mechanism or doing that action and going down that path. So that's my third low, where that piece just didn't feel right. But, all in all, this is a game, and all these games on these videos are games from my collection. They're games I own. So take that for what you will. It's a recommendation at this point. I do regularly cull games, but this is one that the unique mechanics and everything have kept it in my collection, with the building, the worker placement, sort of engine building, and the tension of capturing other people's workers. I think that interaction is something that's severely lacking in most other worker placement games. So those are my highs and lows for Architects of the West Kingdom. Thanks so much for watching.